High school. That place you either love or hate, but can't really be indifferent towards. A lot of people truly understand themselves and grow into their own persons in one. And so it is not really surprising to see how much of art and literature revolves around the high school experience. Some of the most loved art and literature of the 20th century and beyond has been set in the high school. Catcher in the Rye, Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Breakfast Club, Mean Girls, and many, many, many more. I could do an entire video just listing out all the great pieces of art to have been set in a high school. I call it the Great American High School Novel. I do not say that high schools form a commonplace setting only in America. Britain has a proud tradition of the boarding school novel. Similarly, Japanese literature also uses high school as a setting in a lot of manga and novels. Every great American high school novel follows a similar narrative structure. It starts with a protagonist who is generally an outsider, is rebellious, and feels like he doesn't belong. Be it Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye, or Charlie in Perks of Being a Wallflower. We often see the world through their eyes and experience their twisted perception and impressions of the world. The first act ends with the introduction of the catalyst, which is usually a person, an event, or an action that changes the protagonist's life, usually for the better, even though temporarily. For example, Mia Thermopolis finds out that she is the princess of a small European country in The Princess Diaries. The second act follows the protagonist as he or she gets comfortable in this life and ends up liking it. Olive Pendergast in Easy A takes money from boys in her class in exchange for lying about their sexual prowess while enjoying her increased popularity. The second act ends with the explosion, where the new lifestyle goes too far and creates a major problem for the protagonist. Troy and Gabriella cannot balance their responsibilities with theater, and this creates a rift in their relationship in High School Musical. The final act sees the protagonist solve the problem by accepting who they are and using their newfound confidence and self-awareness to face and win over the conflict. It's a universal story that anyone can relate to as it deals with themes that all of us experience. That of loneliness, not fitting in, isolation, and growing up. Coming of age is in fact a very fitting term to describe the genre. But here's the million-dollar question. Where is the great Indian high school novel? India is the sixth largest book publishing country in the world and a $7 billion market. There are no official numbers as to how many books are published in the country, but estimates put it in tens of thousands. But looking back, there have only been a handful of memorable works based in a high school in the last few decades. Barring the exception of Ruskin Bond, who brought to India the British tradition of the boarding school novel due to his Anglo-Indian roots, there have been very few novels set in a high school that have captured the public imagination. Movies have tried to explore the idea more often than popular literature, but the efforts often seem jarring and alien to the Indian psyche. The most memorable movie in the genre has to be Jo Jeeta Wahi Sikandar, but barring that, there are no notable mentions. 2013's Gippy, directed by Sonam Nair, follows the life of an overweight teenager through high school and ends in a big finale where the crush skips the prom night to spend time with Gippy. For most of Indians, where prom isn't a cultural phenomena, the movie just feels like a cheap John Hughes ripoff. Karan Johar's Student of the Year became the butt of many jokes for its extravagant and ridiculously unrealistic portrayals of school life in India. But why has the high school remained so neglected in India? In India, there's a sharp drop in resources when one moves from secondary to higher education. Unlike much of the Western world, the number of good colleges are very few compared to the vast population of the country. It is not uncommon to see students preparing 3 to 5 years in advance for the entrance exams that they would face at the end of their high school. In addition, in India, admissions are often predicated only on the marks scored in one key exam, and do not take into consideration the extracurricular achievements or interests of the students as in the West. As a result, much of the high school experience of a common Indian student is spent preparing for entrance exams to secure an admission to said colleges instead of expanding their horizons and creating more well-rounded personalities. But this is only one side of the problem. The actual problem is far more complex and is embedded in the Indian society and parenting style. Coming-of-age stories often need a key ingredient for working as a narrative, one that most Indian youngsters don't experience till much later in life: freedom. Coming of age as a narrative works when the protagonist can make choices with limited information. This moves the plot ahead with how the protagonist deals with the consequences of those actions. In India, however, most of the decisions regarding the youngsters are taken by parents almost unilaterally. Also, it is not uncommon to have one parent, usually the mother, to be a homemaker. This leads to constant surveillance, which is never a great thing for taking risky decisions. All this leads to a very protected, sanitized, and often boring high school experience. And because no real growth happens, it cannot be turned into a story, as after all stories are about growth. However, all is not lost, and there is an interesting counter movement to this, one that has sprung up in the last 20 years and was a major literary force in the country in the late 2000s and early 2010s. I am, of course, talking about the great Indian college novel. Somewhere at the turn of the century, a new generation of Indian authors with distinctly Indian voices and experiences rose from the wasteland that was popular Indian literature and gave voice to the experiences of a generation. Writers like Chetan Bhagat and Durjoy Datta, despite facing some criticism, created a new subculture in the Indian literary scene that has had quite the run. Thematically, the stories were similar to the high school novel, as they dealt with the issues of sexual awakening, personal growth, increasing self-awareness, and even self-acceptance. This increases one's faith in the analysis, as the Indian college experience is often characterized for a lot of people by their first real time away from home. Also, the Indian college experience is significantly different from the Western college experience, with a lot of time available to the student for personal projects and exploring their own areas of interest. This is the driving factor behind the rise of the great Indian college novel. Coming of age novels are not only entertaining but also serve a wider purpose. These stories, vicariously, set one up for the coming adult life and get one more comfortable with the idea of taking decisions on one's own. As we step into a new world, which is as exciting as it's scary, it's important for the new generation to be able to break away from traditions and think for itself. As we increasingly get less and less dependent on our parents and authority figures to make our decisions for us, we must find our own Indian Holden Caulfields, Mia Thermopolises, and Charlies to confide in, empathize with, and learn from. And for that, the great Indian high school novel must rise to the occasion as a genre whose time has come. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and comment below and tell me which is your favorite book or a movie set in a high school. And I will see you in a later video here on LittStuff.